Okay. So yes, welcome everyone. And I just wanted to do a little light housekeeping before Adrian starts his presentation tonight. And I spoke to Dan yesterday. He's traveling back from Florida, so he couldn't make it. But he did want to let everyone know that the next scheduled program will be our first in-person event since January 2020. So that's very exciting. And so save the date, July 3rd at 10:30 a.m. And it will be the lavender picking tour of the Warwick Furnace Lavender Farm in Upper Chester County. So we'll do lavender picking, have a talk on the historical culinary uses of lavender with Dolly Rosen. She will be our hostess and fellow Historic Foodways member, and we'll have a light lunch of lavender-based treats. So there will be a limited number of attendees, and stay tuned for details with registration and a price to come, which will be posted on the website and also in an email to members. And just a reminder, if you are not a member, you can please go to our website, which I'm going to put in the chat right now, Historic Foodways website, and you can join and encourage your friends to join as well. So hopefully we will keep our membership, going strong, and keep our programs going strong for the rest of the year. We don't really have any details for any programs past this, the one I just mentioned. Dan said, stay tuned for other in-person events coming up. So before I introduce Adrian, I just wanted to say, please, reminder to please mute yourselves during his presentation so that we can hear everything that he has to say and really make the most of this wonderful talk that he's going to give us. So without further ado, let me introduce Adrian Miller. His program is Black Smoke, African Americans in the United States of Barbecue. He is a James Beard Award winner, food writer, attorney, and certified barbecue judge, which how cool is that? Who lives in Denver, Colorado. His first book was Soul Food, The Surprising Story of an American Cuisine, One Plate at a Time, and it won the James Beard Foundation Award for Scholarship and Reference in 2014. And then a second book, The President's Kitchen Cabinet, The Story of African Americans Who Have Fed Our First Families from the Washingtons to the Obamas, was published on President's Day in 2017. And that was a finalist for the 2018 NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literary Work, Nonfiction, and a 2018 Colorado Book Award for History. So Adrian's going to tell us how Black barbecuers, pitmasters, and restaurateurs helped develop the cornerstone of American foodways and how they are coming into their own today. It's a smoke-filled story of Black perseverance, culinary innovation, and entrepreneurship. So again, without further ado, Adrian, if you want to start sharing your screen and give us your wonderful presentation.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Becky, and good evening, everyone. And Becky, it's my fault. I forgot to share with you the hype names that people have created for me, like the Czar of Char, the Pharaoh of Fire, the Sultan of Smoke. But, that's my bad. I should have given those to you. But yeah, so tonight, it's good to be with you. And what I'm going to do is just kind of go through the structure of my book. And so talk about my journey, how I came to write this book, and then just go through the chapters and give you a feel for what I discuss in the book. And then take your questions and, maybe we can playfully argue about barbecue at the end. All right. Okay, there is me at one of my favorite barbecue joints in Denver, Colorado, named Boney's Barbecue. As you can see, I'm very impressed by the barbecue. Unfortunately, Boney's closed because of the pandemic. That really made me sad. If I were to take that picture today, I would definitely have a sad expression on my face. but just wanted you to know how much I love barbecue. So if you are a social media person, you are encouraged to do social media throughout this presentation. I am Soul Food Scholar on most platforms. My tagline is dropping knowledge like hot biscuits, which I certainly hope to do tonight. Unless you have something negative to say, then you can just hold on to that, right? There's no reason to really share that. All right, so let me tell you about my journey. As Becky mentioned earlier, my first book was on the history of soul food, and that really is what led to this barbecue book, because what I learned is as I was studying soul food culture, there's a lot of overlap with barbecue. If you're familiar with soul food restaurants, a lot of soul food restaurants have a barbecue option on the menu. And then there are a lot of Black-owned barbecue joints that have soul food sides. So I really started paying attention to barbecue as I was working on the soul food book. And what I did for that book is I created a representative soul food meal. I wrote a chapter about every part of the meal and I explained what it is, how it gets on the soul food plate, and what it means for the culture. So just very quickly, the meal that I created for this soul food meal was fried chicken, catfish. And while I'm saying this, you can applaud in the comments, you can say amen, whatever moves you, and then chitlins. Now, chitlins are pig intestines, not for everybody. Then I did greens, and in soul food culture, the popular greens are collard, kale, mustard, turnip, and cabbage. So if you discovered kale in the last 5 to 10 years, welcome to the party. We've been eating it for about 300. And then candied sweet potatoes, black-eyed peas, candy jams, some people call them black-eyed peas, mac and cheese, cornbread. I wrote a chapter on hot sauce. Then I wrote a chapter on red drink, because I believe red Kool-Aid is the official soul food drink. And in soul food culture, red is a color and a flavor. We don't call things cherry or strawberry or cranberry, or it has hints of red. It's just red. And then for dessert, I couldn't decide on one, so I wrote about 4: pound cake, peach cobbler, banana pudding, and sweet potato pie. And then my next book, The President's Kitchen Cabinet, also was a result of my soul food research. And what I did there is I wrote a collective biography of the African Americans who have cooked for our presidents. And what I discovered is that every president has had an African American cooking for them in some capacity. And through my own research, I discovered 150 of them. And I know I'm just scratching the surface because records weren't kept very well. All right, but enough about my writing journey. Okay, I wanted to give you that old drive-in kind of feel. So how did I come to write this book? Well, in 2004, I was doing, my research on my soul food book. And again, I was really interested in barbecue. And the Food Network was making a really big push on barbecue programming. And so there was this show, Paula's Southern Barbecue, which was an hour-long show. And I thought, I should just check that out, because I'll just find out some of the latest figures and personalities in barbecue and just make a mental note of who I should keep track of. So an hour later, when the credits were rolling, my mouth was agape, because this tour of the American South and barbecue did not include any African Americans. And my first question was, okay, how does that even happen? Second question was, well, maybe I wasn't paying close attention to the promotional material. Maybe it was Paula Deen's Scandinavian barbecue, sponsored by Alabama White Sauce, right? I just got it twisted. So, this troubled me, because this did not square with my own experience. Growing up as an African-American, barbecue is a huge part of our food culture. And I know that African-Americans have made significant contributions. So I thought, let me just look at other food media. And whether it was TV shows, films, print media, whatever, newspapers, magazines, there was a pattern that emerged. And that pattern was to push African Americans to the sidelines when it came to telling stories about barbecue. And I just thought that was messed up. And here's why. Because if you actually look at 200 years of barbecue history, African Americans are featured very prominently in not only writing about it, but artwork, anything about barbecue culture, African Americans are involved. So we're going to zoom in here. So this is a scene from the 1895 Atlanta Exposition. So this was written about extensively, and usually included this artwork, but if it didn't, there was vivid descriptions that were in syndicated newspapers across the country. So this was a big splash. And this is what barbecue was for 2 centuries. Essentially, it was digging a pit, filling it with hardwood burning coals, then butchering whole animals, butterflying them, sticking poles in the sides of these animals, the carcasses, and then somebody had to constantly flip those animals so they didn't burn while cooking and sauce that. And so, this is the way barbecue was done. And this type of barbecue was strongly associated with African Americans. And so, what I love about this scene is you've got the people in the forefront doing the cooking. You've got this white man kind of overseeing everything. And usually in the press, this white man would get all the publicity as being the barbecuer, even though the staff is all black. If you move to the right-hand side of the screen here, you'll see an African-American man with a shovel with some burning coals because somebody had to keep a separate fire to replenish the coals as the cooking process went. And you see a group of spectators just marveling at the whole sight. And then if you go to the very back of this scene, you'll see someone making what was called Brunswick stew, which originally was a hunter's stew, but eventually was a chicken stew that was often served with barbecue in Georgia. In Kentucky, the equivalent would be something called burgoo. All right, so this is the way barbecue was known to most people. Okay, then, all right, I've got to shrink that back. Okay. And now we've got this is a July 2003 in Bon Appetit magazine. And we're going to zoom in here because this article is Who's Who in American Barbecue. And when we zoom in here, what we see is a depiction of a backyard scene. People are playing badminton, croquet, all kinds of stuff. And you don't see one African-American in this list or this collection of people who are the who's who of barbecue. You've got a Asian-American guy in the middle there with the beach ball. You've got a woman over kind of on the left-hand side talking to a guy at the grill. But other than that, it's pretty much white dudes. And so the question is, oops, sorry about that. I hit the button too many times. So the question is, how do we go from that scene in Atlanta to this scene in recent barbecue history? And so that's why I wrote this book. So Black Smoke is really a celebration of African-American barbecue culture and also a restoration of African Americans to the barbecue story. So the first thing I do is I establish the Native American roots of barbecue. If you've paid attention to a lot of barbecue history, the story that's typically told in terms of barbecue's backstory is Europeans come to the Caribbean, they see indigenous people cooking in a way that they really don't recognize, and eventually that's called barbecue. And then as Europeans get familiar with this cooking technique, they bring it to the American South along with their European animals, goats, pigs, cows, sheep, and then barbecue is born. What really bothered me about that narrative is one, it assumes that Native Americans on the American South didn't have their own meat cooking and preservation traditions. And secondly, the way that barbecue emerges as a pit, that pit that I showed you earlier, is very different from the raised platform that we get reports of in the Caribbean. So something's amiss. Something else is going on in the American South, and I wanted to figure out what that was. So what I did is I just actually poured through the earliest accounts of Europeans going through the American South and picked out what they described as the ways they observed Native Americans cooking. And so one approach was what I call piercing sticks. And so there's really two ways to do this. One is to have a stick in the ground with kind of sticks on the side to create a framework. And then whatever meat was kind of cut in a way that it was kind of splayed over this framework. And then the stick would be tilted towards the fire for faster cooking or tilted away for slower cooking and rotated. Another method was just put a long stick in the ground, firmly in the ground, and put a morsel of meat on the very tip of the stick, and the weight of the meat morsel would bend it towards the fire. That's another way piercing sticks were used. Another was a rotating spit. Now, this would have been very identifiable and familiar to Europeans because they had been doing a lot of spit cooking in Europe. Another example is the raised platform. Now, the raised platform is what people saw on the Caribbean, and essentially 4 sticks were put in the ground, and then a lattice was kind of created of more sticks on top to create kind of a bed that you could lay small animals like iguanas, fish, vegetables, and other things. All kinds of things were put on this platform, and then it was over a very slow fire. So there are reports from Europeans observing these things that sometimes the cooking process would go a couple of days, maybe even longer. So, that's a really slow fire, not cooking for immediate consumption. And the idea is that barbecue in many ways was about preservation, smoking meat for later use. Another is the earth oven. Now, the earth oven is all over the world, right? We see that in so many different cultures. But in the Americas, typically a vertical hole was dug, and then the wood and stones were put down as kind of the heat source for the bottom, and the stones would retain more heat. And then there was layers of vegetation and meat, and then this whole, the alternating layers. And then when you get to the top of the hole, it was either covered with something, maybe dirt, or just covered with some kind of lid. And then the idea is that if you did this early in the morning, you would come back later in the evening and have a feast, or you would do this later in the day and let it cook overnight. And then the next morning you have the breakfast of champions. And then the fifth one that I identify is what I call the shallow pit. So the shallow pit varied depending upon the tribe. Sometimes meat was actually placed right on top of the rocks or the wood to cook. But a lot of times it was elevated above that somehow. And so my argument is that in Virginia, barbecue takes shape when Native American forms of smoking meat are fused with European ways of faster cooking. It was a process very much like grilling today, what was called carbonating, sorry. And those things come together, and eventually that puts us on the road to barbecue. So enslaved Native Americans and white indentured servants were probably barbecue's earliest cooks, and then enslaved Africans come into the picture a little bit later. All of this is hazy because unfortunately, we just don't have a lot of great descriptions of early barbecue. And unfortunately, of the descriptions we have, there are quite a few errors in what is described. And sometimes this was because the writer had an agenda. They wanted to depict Native Americans as savages. And so all of a sudden, instead of iguanas and fish on that raised platform, there would be human limbs and things like that. And for whatever reason, people who were in Florida would borrow images of Native Americans in the Caribbean or even in South America and say that those Floridian Native Americans were cooking that way, and that's not historically accurate. So there's a lot of misinformation going around in this period. So after talking about the Native American roots, then I move on and talk about how Blackness and barbecue get wedded together by the time you get to the 19th century. So this is a newspaper report from the Bangor Review, that's Bangor, Maine. And essentially the guy writing this piece, rather than give his own musings about barbecue, he reached out to a friend who was a native Virginian. And this native Virginian informed this Maine audience of what true barbecue was. And if you look at this, it says, a friend who was a native of Virginia has furnished us with the following account of the manner of arranging a barbecue at the South. An agreeable and retired place is selected near some spring and pleasant grove. And most importantly here, on the previous day, some favorite Negro man of reputation for skill and experience in the business is set up with his assistants, who proceed to make a kiln or pit of stones. So what this is telling you is that the go-to cooks for barbecue were African Americans. And here's why. Old school barbecue is very labor intensive. As this, if you were to read the whole article, you would get this sense. Somebody's got to clear a rural setting of all debris and stuff so people can sit down and be comfortable. Somebody has to chop a lot of wood, start those fires, burn it down to coals. Somebody had to dig the trench, fill that trench up with the coals. Someone had to kill the animals, butcher them, process them, and cook them, sauce them. Somebody had to serve all of this food, and somebody else had to provide the entertainment after all the eating was done. And in most contexts in the American South, African Americans were the ones who did every single process of what a barbecue was, as a food and also as a social event. And barbecue is scalable. So we get reports in the 1820s and 30s of barbecues for 20,000, 50,000 people. Now, I don't know if these numbers are accurate because they didn't have satellite technology back then, right? But you know that there were a lot of people there. And because if you're going to have a lot of work done and you don't want to pay the people to do that work, enslaved African Americans were often called upon to do this work. And that made barbecue possible. And we also see barbecue spreading across the country with the spread of slavery. As Virginians had exhausted the land in Virginia and sought opportunities in other parts of the American South, they brought their enslaved people with them, and they would hold barbecues in these new venues. What's interesting is in the early years of barbecue, it was called Virginia barbecue because that was considered the locus of where this took place. And so you could be in Kentucky and have this barbecue, and rather than calling it a Kentucky barbecue, they would say, oh, we had a Virginia barbecue in Kentucky. Now, over time, those associations get lost and it's just barbecue or Southern barbecue generally. But that just shows you how strongly identified barbecue was with Virginia as place and with African Americans as the people doing the work. So so during slavery, enslaved African Americans become barbecue's go-to cooks. And then after slavery, those who'd been cooking barbecue for years emerge with a very coveted and marketable skill. And so for the very first time, African Americans get to barbecue on their own terms and make some money doing it. So after talking about this transition through slavery to freedom, I first talk about the first institution where barbecue was really exemplified in terms of cooking it, African Americans cooking for themselves. I argue that the Black church is one of the earliest autonomous institutions in the Black community. And so it was really, and barbecue was associated with the Black church because in the 1820s, not only just African Americans, but white politicians, Black politicians, any politicians of any stripe and preachers of any stripe figured out that barbecue was a great way to draw a crowd. And so church barbecue emerges as a way to not only attract a crowd, but feed them soul food and barbecue at the same time. So they would have things called camp meetings and revivals where hundreds and thousands of people would come to a rural area, listen to preaching all day long, and then take breaks to have food. And a lot of times barbecue was the food that was served there. So on the left-hand side of your screen, you have an ad from a 1920s newspaper in Montana that's part of my faith tradition. My faith tradition is the African Methodist Episcopal Church. So this is unusual because you have it's almost like a spit approach, but you have a big cow that's being cooked rather than a pig in this case. And then on the right-hand side of your screen, in the chapters of my book, I try to draw out 2 or 3 people who I thought evoked the themes of that chapter. So this is a gentleman named Daddy Bruce Randolph Sr., who was a legendary barbecuer in Denver. And he was known as a humanitarian. So he's deeply religious, a man of faith. And so in addition to serving barbecue and running a barbecue restaurant, every Thanksgiving, he would feed thousands of people for free. And he got national press. He was written up in the Los Angeles Times and other newspapers. He died at the age of 94 in 1994. And his son just recently died. Danny Randolph Jr. also ran a barbecue joint in Boulder, Colorado. He died a few weeks ago at the age of 94. So I just wanted to write about this great man of faith and show the connections between church barbecue. Now I have to say, barbecue has been very distracting to my own spiritual life. Anytime that I read the Bible and I see references to like burnt offerings, I think about barbecue. The burning bush story, I wonder, did it smell like hickory, oak, maybe mesquite? The Valley of the Dry Bones, prophecy did they look like spare ribs? These things I wonder about. And I know I need counseling, but I'm just saying it's distracting to my journey. Okay, so then I talk about these people that emerge from barbecue, emerge from emancipation with this skill to barbecue, and I call them freelancers. And so what's interesting is in the latter part of the 19th century, there's such a hunger and taste for Southern barbecue that these African Americans who know how to do this are put on trains, stagecoaches, and boats all across the country to bring a taste of Southern barbecue. Now, a lot of times they would show up and do a cameo, but sometimes they would stay in a community and then kickstart that community's commercial barbecue scene. And I just thought that was interesting. So one gentleman of note is Columbus B. Hill. Now, this is a guy who arrives in Colorado. And I know you're thinking, man, is this whole book about just African Americans in Colorado? No, it's not. But, I wrote the book and I'm from Colorado, so I kind of cherry picked. But this guy is really interesting because unlike so many people of this time, he's an African-American barbecuer who's actually extensively interviewed. And so we get an idea of his personality and his approach to barbecue. So he shows up in Colorado in the late 1870s. And in 1882, he does a barbecue for 5,000 people in Denver. And this was a big deal at the time. In July 4th, 1890, when the cornerstone was laid at the state capitol in Denver, he does a barbecue for 25,000 people. And then in 1898, there was something we call the stock show. It's a big deal. there was a big party thrown for the stock show, and it was supposed to be a VIP barbecue for just 5,000 people. But the word got out in the seedy part of town, and so 30,000 people showed up for this barbecue for 5,000 people, and there ended up being a food riot. The newspapers at the time say that the governor of Colorado and the mayor of Denver, who got on a platform to try to chill people out and try to restore order and calm, were actually booed off the stage and food was thrown at them. So that showed you how hectic it was. And I think one of the tactical mistakes of this time is that somebody thought it would be good to just hand out free beer. Like that would chill people out. And that's really not how it worked out. And then the next chapter, I talk about African-American entrepreneurs. And that ties into what I just said about sometimes African-Americans moved to a community and brought barbecue with them and often kickstarted a community's barbecue scene. So one of the most famous examples is the gentleman on the left is Henry Perry. He's the acknowledged father of Kansas City barbecue. You can see on the bottom, he's a self-proclaimed barbecue king. And that's the other thing. There is a very strong connection between a barbecue and self-promotion. So a lot of these characters called themselves barbecue kings, and they were just as numerous as Saudi Arabian princesses and also Nigerian princesses, the ones that email you for money. They're as numerous as those. And so you can see this menu is very eclectic, right? Because we think of barbecue as just being pork in certain areas, except, here he's showing that not only was it pork, beef, and mutton, but he had a lot of wild game on the menu as well. And that's something his customers wanted. The woman on the left, you may not know about. Her name is Ernestine Vanduval, and she's from Nicodemus, Kansas. And Nicodemus, Kansas is one of the storied communities in the African-American culture because it was founded by exodusters. And so these were people who, newly freed African-Americans who headed west for opportunity. And they went to this place in Western Kansas and started this town called Nicodemus in 1876. And she grew up there in the 1900s. And she left to go to Pasadena, went further west for opportunity. And she ran a combination soul food and barbecue joint. And evidently, Walt Disney loved her food. But later in life, she returns to Nicodemus and runs a barbecue restaurant there, which her niece, Angela Bates, runs to this day. Now, Nicodemus is a shadow of itself because the combination of the Dust Bowl and other things led to the demise of the community. But every late July, early August, they have a family reunion basically for the town. And so people from all sorts come back and anybody's welcome. So imagine being allowed to just drop in on the most welcoming family reunion you could imagine. And during that weekend, Angela Bates is there running the barbecue joint. It was just a lot of fun. And then I write about sauce. So there's a conventional wisdom emerging that barbecue should be unsauced, and most African Americans I talk to would say says who? Because barbecue sauce is actually considered a calling card. So this cartoon on the left is from the Kansas City Star when Arthur Bryant, who was a legendary barbecuer in Kansas City, when he died. It is a depiction of him being at the pearly gates with St. Peter. And the question that St. Peter has for him is, did you bring the sauce? And on the left side, or the right side of your screen, is an early ad for a commercial barbecue sauce. Now, I'm really surprised that there weren't more depictions of African Americans in barbecue in a commercial sense, like Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben, Faustus. You don't really see that happen with barbecue, which surprises me given the strong associations with African Americans. But I love this because this African American in this ad, at least, which shows up in an Atlanta newspaper in 1911, confers authority. He's obviously an elderly man, just given by his beard, but he looks like he's an expert. He looks like a guy who knows what he's doing, and it's not a caricature. So I just love that ad. And then I wrote about competition barbecue and just gave my thoughts as to why there are few African Americans on the competition circuit. Memphis in May started yesterday. Memphis in May is probably the largest and most popular barbecue contest in the world. You may not know this, but the first winner of Memphis is May is this woman, Bessie Mae Cathy, who showed up with a minimal setup and barbecued her way to the title. Now, can you imagine that happening today? If you know anything about Memphis in May, with all the complex rigs, the injections, the rubs, all the science that's been put into barbecue. But here, this Black woman just kind of rolled up, did her thing, and won. One of the people I profile is Sylvie Curry. She's probably the most recognizable African-American woman on the barbecue circuit. She calls herself the Lady of Q. What's remarkable about her is that when she competes in these contests, she does it all herself because she doesn't like people getting all in her way, which is just really remarkable. If you have Netflix, there's a show called America's Barbecue Showdown. Sylvie Curry is on that show, and she does a deep run in the competition. I'm not going to give it away, but I think you will be very impressed with her food, especially when you get to the sandwich competition. Oh, man. And then I started talking about, is there a Black barbecue aesthetic? So I kind of go through different regional styles, and I'm just going to run through them very quickly here. So in the Carolinas, if you're on the eastern part of the state, that's going to be more whole hog barbecue cooking. And if you're on the western part of the state, it's going to really be more about pork shoulders. And the sauce is going to have some tomato in it. So this is a plate. The plate I'm showing you is from a place called Grady's Barbecue in Dudley, North Carolina. It's one of my favorite places. And so this is a typical plate, right? Like a coleslaw that's very, very vinegary and white, not really creamy. You've got the pork shoulder that's been doused with the red pepper and vinegar sauce. And if you have an attitude about Carolina barbecue, I would submit that you probably haven't had really good Carolina barbecue, because when somebody knows what they're doing, the vinegar sauce is added throughout the cooking process, and it gives a depth of flavor. It was not meant to be a condiment that you just pour on at the very last minute. And then hush puppies are very popular in Carolina barbecue. And then on the bottom, you've got this thing that I call Deep South barbecue. It's a little more amorphous, but an emphasis on ribs and pork shoulder. Usually the pork shoulder is chopped up. The sauce is it's tomato and vinegar. It's like a combination of tomato and vinegar, but a lot of southern side. So you're going to get greens, you're going to get mac and cheese and white bread along with with whatever barbecue you're served. Memphis is one of my favorite regional styles, and Memphis is known for the chopped pork sandwich with coleslaw. So this is a sandwich from Payne's Barbecue in Memphis. And what's interesting, in parts of Memphis, they have a mustard slaw. So I got to tell you, I think that this pork sandwich is the platonic form of pork sandwiches. This is so delicious. So if you're ever in Memphis, you got to go to Payne's. And if you eat meat, you eat pork, you got to get this sandwich. The contrast between the pork and the tangy mustard slaw is just amazing. And then Chicago. So Chicago is a barbecue style that just doesn't get any love. Nobody ever talks about Southside Chicago as a regional style, but they have a very distinctive type of barbecue. It's rib tips with hot link sausages, fries, all drowned in sauce. And you may even have white bread thrown on top of all of that. Okay, that's Chicago barbecue. East Texas. When people talk about Texas barbecue, they usually gravitate towards Central Texas. But the earliest iterations of barbecue, except for what's happening in the South with Latinos who are doing barbacoa, and that's the earth oven approach with the pit and the vertical pit and everything. In the 1820s and 30s, we have newspaper reports of African Americans cooking barbecue. These are enslaved African Americans doing barbecue. So that's the earliest arrival of barbecue. And what we talk about in Central Texas, which is really indirect smoke, because it's indirect cooking, it's really smoking meat, not necessarily barbecuing if you want to get technical about it. But, we've expanded barbecue to include smoking, so it doesn't matter anymore. But that's a tradition that's really only 100 or so years old. African Americans outlast that by at least 5 decades. But in East Texas, the barbecue is going to have a lot of similarity with other parts of Texas. So it's going to be beef, sausage, ribs, although there's a Creole influence because of the proximity to Louisiana. So you're going to have dirty rice as an option, as a side dish. You're going to have Creole spices involved. And you're also going to get something called boudin sausage. And so that all shows up in East Texas. Now, this is a place called Patillo's on top. And that's a beef sandwich with a very rich, almost gravy-like barbecue sauce. Delicious. And Patillo's is one of the oldest barbecue restaurants in Texas, founded 1910 or 1912, a black run, and a lot of people don't know about it. Then you have Kansas City. Full disclosure, Kansas City is my favorite barbecue style, and Kansas City was a agricultural center, so it's a true melting pit of different styles and meats. So you can get ribs, chicken, mutton, brisket, hot link sausages, all of that stuff happens in Kansas City. So, if I were to say, well, what are the things that are most likely going to show up on African American barbecue menus? I would say pork spare ribs. Now, the spare ribs in black joints tends to be less butchered than what you find in other places. So, you may have heard of something called the St. Louis cut. The St. Louis cut was created to give a rack of spare ribs a more rectangular and uniform appearance. And what happens is you get rib tips, right? Because that top part, the flap of the brisket, all of that stuff is cut off. And so in African American joints, usually it's not butchered that heavily. And so African American spare ribs are usually going to have the spare rib or the rib tip attached. Chopped pork is very popular. It's not called pulled. In most places, it's just called chopped pork. And this is going to be the pork shoulder. I talked about chicken. It shows up everywhere, especially in the deep South. But chicken is usually a mainstay regardless of where you are. And then hot link sausages. And in African American circles, these hot link sausages tend to be a coarser grind and very, very spicy. And some of these have an unnatural color of red. They're dyed red for whatever reason, but that tends to be the hot links. And hot links can be made out of pork or beef, and sometimes a combination of. And then rib tips, which I talked about before. So, because so many butcher shops and slaughterhouses were cutting off the rib tip to create spare ribs, you had some innovation. So, some brothers were just like, okay, I'm going to wait till the slaughterhouse closes, and then I'm just going to dig in the trash, get all these rib tips, wash them off, smoke them, and sell them. And so that's a guy named Leon Finney does that in Chicago in the 1950s and births a new regional style. So that's where that comes from. And then Monroe County is in Kentucky. When you hear about Kentucky barbecue, you usually only hear about Owensboro, mutton, and a Worcestershire sauce that's called black dip. But there's other traditions. And so, this is one that's on the straddling the line between barbecue and grilling. But essentially, you take a pork shoulder, freeze it, and then you cut it to a half an inch thick while it's still frozen. And then that cut forms the Monroe County pork steak. So it's grilled and then doused in a fiery sauce. And now let's talk about some of the weird stuff. Okay, so I got to give it, Memphis has the weirdest barbecue. I mean, that's barbecue's equivalent of Funky Town. So one is barbecue bologna. Now, if you've never had barbecue bologna, this is one of the great delights in barbecue. What they do is they take a tube of bologna, they stab it and create slits on it, and then they put it on the smoker, leave it there for a few hours, and then when you want your barbecue bologna sandwich, what they will do is they'll cut in, however thick you want it, but usually it's a half an inch thick. They'll cut that off. They'll put it on the grill to give it some char, and then it's white bread, bologna, coleslaw, sauce, white bread. Delicious. And then there's also barbecue spaghetti. Here's how you make barbecue spaghetti. It's essentially the noodles, and then instead of marinara sauce, you get a very special barbecue sauce that's heavily seasoned, and you add the grilled meat, and you mix it all together. It is awesome. I mean, I can see some of you are disgusted, but I'm telling you, it's delicious. And I mentioned Arthur Bryant earlier. This is the guy at the pearly gates about his sauce. So I want to take a moment and talk about burnt ends. So burnt ends are very fashionable. It might be one of the most trendy barbecue items today. So burnt ends were invented essentially by this guy, Arthur Bryant. So when you trim a brisket, especially when the point end of it is very fatty, and they're usually just like these shards of very crispy, fatty meat. That when barbecue restaurateurs were serving brisket, they would usually trim that off and throw it away. So the genius of Arthur Bryant was, he's like, hey, no, I'm not going to throw that away. I'm just going to put it in a bowl and put it on the counter, and my customers can munch on that while they're waiting for their orders. So if it's taking me a long time, they're not going to complain too much because they're just like, yeah, take your time with my order. So burnt ends come from Kansas City. Now there's a conception or perception that burnt ends come from Texas, and I don't know how that happened, but really they originate and were most popular in Kansas City first. But burnt ends have changed. So the earliest burnt ends were shards of meat, but now if you order burnt ends in almost any place, it's going to be this perfectly manicured cube of beef that's very Instagrammable, right? Because it's going to have the bark, the seasoned crust, it's going to have a smoke ring and a perfect cube. That's not what burnt ends were. So what I argue is that burnt ends have been gentrified. to add a lot more meat and other things, and you pay a lot more for them than for something that was once given away for free. And if I had some romantic music, maybe I'll add this to my presentation in the future. I argue, I conclude my book, but ultimately conclude it by saying, like, the problem is that African Americans are not being included when it comes to barbecue storytelling, because barbecue media has fallen deeply, tenderly, and maddeningly in love with white dudes who barbecue. And I argue there are four archetypal types of white dudes who barbecue. So moving from the far left over to the right, far left, you have Tuffy Stone, decorated grand champion of barbecue, multiple world champion winner. So he's the competition guy. And then you got Myron Mixon, who is a hybrid, right? Because he's a very decorated competition guy, but he represents kind of the Bubba type, right? The working class, rural, strong rural identity kind of white dude. And then you've got Aaron Franklin, who's I would say he's actually the most recognized barbecue guy in the world right now. He's the guy in Aaron's Franklin. He owns Franklin's Barbecue in Austin, Texas. This is the place where people line up for 4 hours just to get his food. So he's the hipster type, right? He's got interesting glasses, interesting facial hair, some tattoos. And then you've got the tokes who smoke. These are the fine dining chefs who are now in barbecue in a way they were never before. And so these are the ones that are presented as barbecue experts over and over and over. And why does this happen? Because of foodies. So we've always had people interested in food kind of as a leisure activity, but these people tended to be very wealthy. So if you look at Gourmet Magazine from the 50s and 60s and 70s, Bon Appetit, they were catering to a very elite customer base, kind of higher end. But foodies are a group of middle-class people who emerge in the late 80s, early 90s. They're intensely interested in food. They'll travel. They have a much more adventuresome palate than their parents. And they're curious. They want authentic food experiences. And so the rise of foodies leads to this commensurate rise of food media, Food Network, more magazines pop up, other things. And Gourmet and Bon Appetit start changing their coverage to meet the needs of foodies. And at the same time, barbecue is getting very important, very popular. So foodies are asking two questions. First of all, what is barbecue? Because believe it or not, a lot of people didn't know what real barbecue was. And where do I get the good stuff? And so the people who decide what stories get told, mainly white media, unless they valued diversity and inclusivity, wanted to be inclusive with their coverage, they were just talking to other white people about, hey, who should we write stories about? Who are we hearing about? And so white person after white person after white person, usually guys, were the ones who were conferred authority and made the experts and made the go-to people at barbecue, which means that African Americans get pushed to the sidelines. Why is this important? Because so many people are making money in barbecue that I just want African Americans to share in the barbecue prosperity, especially since they are the ones who did a lot to shape what barbecue is today. So there's an emerging, with all of this, because barbecue is being shifted away from an African American aesthetic, there's an emerging conventional wisdom about barbecue. One is that it's low and slow, that you have to cook at a low temperature for a long period of time, and you're cooking less desirable cuts of meat. Well, that's not the whole barbecue story, because as you now know, most of barbecue history, barbecue was whole animal cooking. And so the shift to smaller cuts of meat really happens when there's a transition around the 20th century, the turn of the 20th century, from cooking barbecue in a rural context to cooking it in an urban context. And because of space constraints and other things, people started cooking smaller cuts of meat. And all of my cooks here listening, what do you know? It's a lot easier to cook something when it's cut up into smaller pieces than when you're cooking a whole animal. And then to show the sensibility of fine dining chefs, they're saying, oh, you should have minimal seasoning, just salt and pepper so you can really taste the meat. They're really emphasizing high quality meat, like you should be cooking with Kobe beef or prime beef, Wagyu beef. And they're also saying no sauce. And so again, this is not consistent with a lot of ways that African American African Americans barbecue. So for instance, low and slow. I can just tell you, I know a lot of African American cooks, especially when they're making spare ribs, they cook hot, fast, then slow. Lesser cuts of meat, You could argue that, but now with the way that prices are going, I don't know. Are they really lesser cuts of meat? I mean, if something's $30 a pound, is it a lesser cut of meat? And then, we talked about seasoning and sauce. A lot of African Americans use rubs and sauces, and white cooks do this as well. But there is a shifting that's going on about what barbecue, at least authentic stuff, is supposed to be. So I ultimately conclude with the future of Black barbecue. One figure to watch is a guy named Rodney Scott. He is a whole hog barbecue guy out of Hemingway, South Carolina. He now has a spot in Charleston, South Carolina, Birmingham, Alabama, and Atlanta, Georgia. I think he's eyeing expansion. I don't know if there's a national appetite for whole hog barbecue. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. But if anybody has a chance of making it happen, it's him. He's got some money behind him and a very compelling story. He's a James Beard award-winning chef, so he's only the second barbecue guy to win that award after Aaron Franklin did. He's a finalist for the Barbecue Hall of Fame, so just very interesting guy. Oh, and one thing I wanted to back up and say about Rodney Scott, he's also come out with a barbecue cookbook called Rodney Scott's World of Barbecue. Believe it or not, it is the first cookbook by an African-American pitmaster in 30 years. Now think about all the cookbooks that have been published. What's up with that? Another guy I write about is Ed Mitchell and his son Ryan. Ed Mitchell is a legendary barbecuer out of North Carolina. And he specializes in whole hog barbecue. This is a whole hog barbecue from the Big Apple block party that used to happen in New York City starting I think around 2010 or so. But it only lasted a few years. Why? Because too many people showed up. There were 60,000 people descending on this scene, and so they had to cancel it because they just couldn't handle the logistics. But again, Ed Mitchell has been on the scene for a long time, and he's got some money behind him. They were going to open a restaurant last year, but the pandemic closed it. So hopefully they're able to open up the restaurant this summer. Also, I talked about Deborah and Mary Jones. I don't know if you're a fan of Queer Eye, but they made a appearance last season, and their business has taken off since that. But they're two women in barbecue, and what you'll find is in African American circles, Black women have been in the barbecue game for a very, very long time, and a vital part of the scene. And so these women are selling the sales of their barbecue sauce have gone through the roof thanks to their appearance on that show. And then the other cool thing about them, they created a barbecue vending machine. So 24/7, you can get barbecue sauce, barbecue sandwiches, and other things. I just think that is genius. That's awesome. Let's talk a little bit more about barbecue's future. So this is something called turkey ribs. Turkey, you're seeing turkey all over the place in African-American barbecue. So a turkey rib is essentially butchering a turkey a shoulder blade and butchering it in a way that you had enough meat around it that it looks like a spare rib. And so then that's smoked. You're seeing this all over the place. People are substituting turkey for other traditional forms of pork. So Eastern North Carolina, instead of chopped whole hog barbecue, you're getting chopped whole turkey barbecue. And seriously, except for a change in color, you wouldn't know that there was a difference in what you were eating. Pulled and chopped pork and chopped turkey in other parts. In Chicago, turkey tips and turkey hot links. So you're seeing turkey. And I think this is tracking what happened in soul food 20 years ago, where there was a real strong push to have healthier options compared to the traditional food. Another thing you're seeing is, and especially in African-American barbecue, is vegan. A lot of plant-based barbecue is emerging. I don't know how many of you have had jackfruit, but jackfruit, if somebody knows what they're doing, jackfruit can look like, taste like, and in your mouth feel like pork. But you have to have somebody who knows what they're doing. And it's quite good. Jackfruit is from Southeast Asia, and you're seeing it in a lot of circles. The interesting thing is there were a lot of Denver-based restaurants, barbecue restaurants, that had jackfruit on the menu. And Colorado has this reputation for being healthy, because people aren't talking about me. But the jackfruit was taken off the menu because it doesn't move. And it would be interesting to talk to barbecuers, restaurateurs around the country to see if it's a different case. Maybe in California it would be different, but man, I'm just telling you, it just doesn't really sell. And I hate to gross you out, but some things we got to think about because the technology is here is, lab grown meat. We are at the point now where you can actually grow meat in a test tube that looks and tastes like the real thing off an animal. So the question is, will American consumers like this? Because if American consumers transition to lab-grown meat or 3D printed meat, and again, we have the technology, it's here already, that could have tremendous implications for our food system, for sustainability issues and everything, but it's a psychological thing. And I would love to find out from you all if you would eat lab-grown meat. Um, and then, in addition to that, just the plant-based options, which you're seeing a lot. And, I raised the question, will African Americans be grubbing on Impossible ribs in 10 years? I don't know, but it's a possibility. And then I just say, hey, when I wrote this book, I was kind of dire. When I first started writing it, I was kind of dire. I thought I was going to be writing an elegy for African American barbecue, but I'm full of excitement. There may not be as many brick and mortar places as there once were, but just the barbecue scene has shifted. So you still have a lot of people on the roadside or in parking lots for their churches, for family reunions, other things who are cooking barbecue. And I just love this picture, because can't you just imagine yourself doing the exact same thing as this guy? All right. Thank you so much. My book was published April 27th. If you can get it at anywhere books are sold. There's an audiobook on the way if you're an audiobook fan. I am not the narrator for this audiobook because my voice is too sexy, according to these audio companies, and there was liability issues about, possibly causing traffic accidents. Or if you want a signed copy, you can get it directly from me on my website, soulfoodscholar.com. I'm happy to autograph it any way you'd like. If you want me to say I couldn't have written the book without you, happy to do that. So thank you for your time, and let's get to your questions.
Thank you so much, Adrian. That was fabulous. And I love that second to last picture that you posted. I saw that in your book too. I love that so much.
Yeah.
What a fabulous presentation. Thank you so much. So informative. I know when I was looking through your book, I never knew also the connection to Native Americans. And I thought that was just fascinating. And also should be in the forefront as well, to showcase what, American heritage is.
Yeah.
So really fabulous for you, that you brought that to the forefront too. And I'm just going to start with a couple of questions. People, please, everyone, please feel free to put them in the chat or unmute yourselves. But I have just two things real quick. One is, because in the beginning you mentioned fish and other, is that something that is a big thing in different, states? Because I guess it would fall apart a lot, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. So if you're going to do fish, for the most part, you got to smoke it in a really low temperature. Because, somebody just asked me the other day, hey, what about grilling catfish? And I said, yeah, it tastes good, but it just falls apart. So I know a few people that smoke it, and usually you're going to do a sturdier fish, right? That's why you're seeing salmon and other things. But, in Florida, mullet, that is a very popular smoked fish. And not only Florida, but I would say kind of coastal southeast US. So Carolinas all the way to kind of Florida, you'll see mullet a lot. And that's the only one, besides salmon, that's really the only one that I hear about consistently. Because with some of the other meatier fish, if they don't have a high fat content, like swordfish and other, you could dry that out as well. So
No,
it seems
that's
like
true.
salmon.
Yeah.
So salmon is a great one for that.
And you see barbecued shrimp, but I mean, really, you just have to throw them on for a couple of minutes because then they turn into nothing. So
right. So that's more like grilling,
yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm. Right. And that was the other question I was going to ask you, because it seems like, my kids, and I think a lot of, like, I grew up with pieces of chicken on the bone, and now a lot of people, especially young people, oh, I don't want to eat that, but it really does barbecue better, doesn't it? Bone-in meats, because it keeps it more moist.
I don't know if that may be true, but yeah, I just tend to like bone-in stuff, like my fish and all these things. I like the bones in, but yeah, you're right. The way the consumer market is moving, it's moving to boneless, which is setting itself up very nicely for this lab-grown meat and 3D printed meat, because the one thing they haven't figured out is how to replicate bones. They know how to do the flesh, but they haven't figured out how to do the bones. But that's where the market is moving.
Right. Wow. Okay, so I'm gonna go to the chat and see. We have a lot of, if you can see, a lot of yays and thank yous, and I know Chris, you had said something earlier. Oh, I know Chris was wondering where you mentioned Rodney Scott, and I know you had said Charleston, but where else is Rodney Scott located?
Charleston, Birmingham, Alabama, and he just opened a place in Atlanta, Georgia. So that's
Okay,
where he is
so
right now.
that,
But the first one is in Charleston.
okay. And then Chris asks, what would you say is a great place for a barbecue within a day's drive? So I guess, Chris, you mean from us here. Um, so
Yeah.
Maryland,
Well,
maybe? I don't know.
where'd you say?
Maryland. I saw you had one picture from Maryland or one restaurant you recommended in the back. Yeah.
Yeah, so let me just say, I found a lot of solid barbecue. I just didn't find a lot of spectacular stuff. Now, of course, I didn't do an exhaustive search, so I didn't hit everywhere. And I should have backed up. So I've eaten in over 200 restaurants, barbecue restaurants. I call this barbecue research, and I'm always looking for barbecue research assistance. So if you holler at me if you're interested. So the unfortunate thing is that place that I identified in Maryland, I didn't know this, but in between me, right, turning in the manuscript and the book coming out, they sold it to another group. The original owner sold it to another group, so it's managed by somebody else. Now, I don't know if they left the secrets behind, so it may be nasty. So my rep may be on the line. But I just thought that place was really good. It's called 202 Texas Barbecue. Is it 202? Yeah, 202 Texas
Yeah.
Barbecue. Yeah.
Absolutely. Here's the book, everyone. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
in the back. Adrian lists different restaurants that he recommends for barbecue.
Yeah.
I know there's some in Philadelphia, but I have to say I don't know off the top of my head the names of any of them and how good they are or anything.
Yeah. So I went to the black owned places, and yeah, they were just okay. I just didn't think they didn't rise to being on the top 20. And then I went to some places on the kind of eastern Maryland, or not eastern Jersey, and beautiful country. But again, I found some solid places, but I just can't remember like spectacular barbecue. I'm sorry. I really wanted to make you all happy and just give a shout out to your local place, but I'm sorry, I just didn't find it. And I'm not a
We'll
snob,
just that we'll just have to do a road trip, and like I said, I'm going out to Denver, probably within the next year to visit my niece. So I will check out the places you mentioned there for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah. We've got
So,
great barbecue in Denver. Denver's barbecue scene has stepped up significantly. We've got at
well,
least 8 legit places now, and that was not the case 20 years ago.
that's
Now
great.
the
Wow.
unfortunate thing is Central Texas has become the default barbecue style. So what you will find, regardless of where you are in the country, if there's a new barbecue joint opening up, they're pretty much doing Central Texas barbecue, which is fine, right? I like that, but there's so many different types of barbecue. I'm like, can we just get a Kansas City place or a Memphis place just once in a while? Does everybody have to do this? But that's just where the market is. So I argue that for a long time, the default barbecue style was a hybrid of Kansas City and Memphis. Just if you looked at what was on menus, but now it's Central Texas.
Mm, wow. Um, and then Constance asked, any use of mango in sauces or mango wood for smoking?
I've seen mango in sauces. I've never heard of anybody using mango wood. Now, there are a lot of people, especially on the competition circuit, who will use fruit woods because of the perfume that it gives. It gives a nice scent. And so what you're finding now in the competition circuit, and competition circuit barbecue is not, I would argue, real barbecue, because you're in pursuit of that one perfect bite. And look, if you have to get a syringe out to flavor your meat, I mean, really? So, but what people are doing is they're starting off with like a hickory or oak, and they'll cook with that for a little bit, and then they'll add a different wood, cook with that for a little bit, and then just the last hour before serving, they'll have a fruit wood. So what they're trying to do is create layers of flavor in their meat, and so that's where usually. But the most popular fruit woods are apple and cherry wood. But that would be interesting. I wonder what kind of scent or flavor mango wood imparts. That's interesting. But I've definitely seen mango sauces.
Okay. And then Eliza asks, with turkey barbecue, how can you get enough fat to add that richness and mouthful? And that was something I was wondering too. So the reason that they're moving to turkey is for health reasons, you said? Okay.
Yeah. So, but they're focusing mainly on the dark meat. So it's not the turkey breast per se, but with the dark meat, it's been rich enough. I mean, I had no complaints about the barbecue I got. So I think there's enough fat in the dark meat to make up for it. And maybe they have to add some fat. But yeah, it's pretty much dark meat that I experienced. But when you're doing whole, you're just chopping it all up and mixing it all together so that all that fat gets evenly distributed.
It seems like pork these days is leaner anyway. So it's funny that that's a thing. I don't know, but maybe not for barbecue because that's, you want it to be
Yeah, I'm saying
fatty.
the barbecue I get, the pork is fatty, sister. Definitely.
Let's see, we have terrific and fascinating presentation, liked the humor, thank you. Sherry says she hasn't found any restaurants in Philly that are great for barbecue. So there we go. We need to open our own here or something because we
There's
have a lot of good, there's a lot of good food in Philly. So we got to add this to,
Oh yeah, no, there's definitely good. Then there's some guy who's getting a lot of press. He was a white dude who's getting a lot of press a couple years ago, and I just can't remember his name because I was so focused on African Americans that I just can't remember his name.
And there's a really fabulous restaurant near my daughter goes to Temple and it's called Green Soul, but they're focusing more, on healthy stuff. But next time I go in there, maybe I'll ask them if they thought about doing barbecue jackfruit on their menu. So
Well, yeah, and a lot of vegan restaurants they're adding barbecue options, and usually, it's like barbecue sauce makes it barbecue. But what you're finding in addition to jackfruit is a lot of people are experimenting with roots, and so they're doing lotus root or burdock, and they're smoking the root, and then they're cutting it to make it look like a rib tip, and then putting it in sauce. You've got people doing seitan, and there's some people who have managed to smoke tofu to make it taste good. There are not a lot of people that do that well, but there are some.
it's just so moist. It would be, like it's so tough to get all the water out of that. But I can see jackfruit, especially because when you shred it, it has that consistency.
So I have to tell you a very funny story. So the first time that I had jackfruit barbecue was in Boulder, Colorado. Maybe not a surprise. And I went to this joint and, I was going to order the regular stuff. And the guy said, "Hey, have you ever had jackfruit?" And I was highly skeptical. And he said, "No, no, no, man, you got to get this." And I was like, "Why?" He said, "Let me tell you this. There was a vegan convention here a few months ago down the street. So all these vegans came in. I'm thinking, why are vegans coming into a barbecue joint?" And he said, these vegans came in. I told them about the jackfruit and they loved it and they ordered it. And then they started sending it back because they were convinced that it was pork. And I was like, all right,
Wow.
you sold me. And so I tried it and I said, this is good.
Wow. I'll definitely give that a try. Then if I can find it somewhere, I'll have to go to Boulder to get that.
You got to find somebody who knows what they're doing though. Seriously.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see. Hillary says the Ambler PA VFW barbecues every weekend. Okay.
Now, is that a black owned post? Okay. I shouldn't
She
say black
says
owned post,
yes.
but an African American. Okay, that's cool. See,
Yeah.
those are the kinds of traditions I love. Yeah.
Yeah, it is black, but I think it's just on Sundays and
Oh, I love it.
special occasions, holidays and things. And you can order ahead. I've never tried it. I've been meaning to. I'll have to now because I know it's very popular.
And tell me the VFW where?
It's in Ambler, Pennsylvania. It's just north of Philadelphia.
Okay, I'm definitely going to remember that. Thank you so much. I love that.
And Hillary, do they have any specialties or do they just have like, they run through different, like, is it always like pork or any? I'm just
They
curious.
have a whole menu, which includes, I'm looking at it right now, for $15. You could get shrimp or chicken and the chicken can be fried or baked, different pieces of the chicken. They do baked whiting fish, and that includes 2 sides and a roll in butter. And the sides include collard greens with smoked turkey, green beans with smoked turkey, mashed potatoes and gravy, candied yams, macaroni and cheese, French fries with Old Bay, coleslaw, and a mini salad. And oh, they've got some kind of cake in here too. It's not listed, but there's a picture of it.
Wow. Are there direct flights to Ambler,
Ooh,
Pennsylvania?
it's 7
I
Up.
know, right?
Oh, and they deliver with DoorDash too.
Wow.
They do. That's a sophisticated
There
operation.
you go.
I love that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Hillary. That's great.
Sure.
Wow. Okay. And then Chris asked, does anyone barbecue duck?
I have never, I mean, I know people do. I have never seen duck on an African American owned menu at a barbecue restaurant. I have seen it at the hipster barbecue places, but I've never seen it at a black owned place.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, this isn't barbecue, but I'll never forget when I went to Will Reaver. He's one of our longtime members.
yeah,
I went to his house and he had muskrat going on the stove. It wasn't barbecue, but because they do muskrat in South Jersey, and I was like, wow, that's not something you see every day.
Yeah, is
But,
that something you would have again?
I didn't have it because we just sat and talked for a while, and it was still simmering when I left. So yeah, I never got to try it. So
Good move on your
yeah.
part. You distracted him so you didn't have to eat it. Okay, that's a good.
Right.
All right, I see your tactics. All right.
Yeah, but that was interesting because I saw one of your slides had possum, and that made me think of it too, and raccoon and stuff. So yeah, wow. Yeah, and then iguana. That's in the beginning of your book how you mentioned that too. That's I wonder what that tastes like. Have you tried that?
I heard it tastes like muskrat. No, I'm just kidding. I have never had it. I don't know.
Like I wonder if it like gator or something. I don't know. That's
I have had alligator, and I mentioned that in my book. I have a recipe for anybody who's adventurous. I do have a barbecue alligator recipe in my book. It does not taste like chicken. It did have like a kind of an aquatic taste. I don't know how to describe it, but it did not.
I like alligator. I like it a lot, actually.
How would you describe the taste though?
I mean, I think in consistency, it's similar to chicken, but exactly like you said, it has like a slightly like fishy kind of component too. That's why, because I love fish, so that's probably why I like it. But yeah. So, and then Donna asks, is there anything in the Pacific Northwest? Any barbecue there?
Yeah, so I think this is barbecue. Salmon. There's a very rich tradition of smoking salmon that predates European contact, and the way they do it is that pierce stick approach, where essentially these fish are gutted and flayed and then put onto these frames and then angled towards the fire to get smoke. And usually the smoke the wood they use is alder wood. So yeah, very deep tradition in the Pacific Northwest of salmon, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. Well, there's no more questions in the chat, but unless if anybody, I don't think I missed anything. A lot of it was just comments.
Yep. I just wanted to say, well, this was a wonderful presentation, but we have now found out what is wrong with video meetings, because here I am, it's 8:15 on a Thursday, and normally after a speaker, we would sample the food. And here I am outside of Philadelphia, just, looking for barbecue. And there we go. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation.
Oh, thank you so much. It's sorry to let you down, my man. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
sounds
really,
like
really
there's opportunity
fabulous.
here for somebody. We have some excellent African-American chefs. And actually, you talked about Green Soul, which is owned by the Bynum brothers, who've been in the restaurant business for quite a long time. In fact, the Benjamin Bynum, he did his apprenticeship. I was a supervising chef when he did his culinary school apprenticeship back in the 80s. But they would have that opportunity, you know, maybe that would be somebody that would go ahead and move towards this. I could see that happening. So, you know, maybe it's just time for something, you know, push toward that direction. Because they owned also before that the Zanzibar Blue, but also Paris Bistro, so French bistro. Maybe it's time for you know, a really good barbecue, like top quality barbecue. That would be fantastic.
I mean, I don't think Philadelphia is different than any other city. I mean, barbecue is immensely popular. I don't see that abating anytime soon. And people are
Right.
making a ton of money with barbecue.
Right.
You know?
That's why I say it's time for opportunity, or maybe a food truck, you know, less, you know, less investment, like less cost of startup. But
Yeah.
I hope that we do have some, you know, able to experience that, and also, you know, from the large black community in Philadelphia, and so many excellent chefs. So it's time for that.
Well, if I can just make a request, if y'all can get somebody to bring those roast pork sandwiches out here, that's what I'm talking about, with that broccoli rabe and man,
Right, that's Italian.
that's what I'm talking about.
That's Tony Luke's. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I went to John's Roast Pork is the place I went to.
Now you got to go to Tony Luke's.
Okay.
Just like
Oh,
the
no, I went there.
cheesesteaks. Yeah.
Yeah, that's in Reading Market, right?
Tony Luke's is down near Oregon Avenue.
Oh, okay.
It's down
Yeah,
near
like a
the
big
stadium.
white building, right? A big white, is it kind of like?
It's down near, it's down closer to the Delaware. I think it's under 95.
Yeah. I've been there because I remember there was like an overpass. I was just about to ask you, is there an overpass nearby?
Yes.
Okay, I went there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was tasty. Yes.
Yeah.
But evidently, my affinity for John's Roast Pork is misguided. That's what you're telling me, right? Okay, fair enough. Are we still at peace though, even though I said that?
Yes, we are.
Okay, cool.
We'll just have to have a taste testing at some
Uh-huh.
point of all this stuff. So yeah,
Okay.
definitely. When we're all back together, hopefully soon in person.
Yeah.
So, well, are there any other questions? Feel free to either put them in the chat or I'm on mute, and go ahead and ask Adrian if anyone, you have a lot of really positive, you know, just how fabulous it was. So
Oh, good.
really
Thank you. No, it was
appreciate
good
it.
to be with you all.
Yeah.
You had great questions. So thank you.
Absolutely. And you know, you put your slide up with your book, but if anyone has questions, feel free to email me too, or Dan, and we can send you the exact link for that. So
Yeah,
too.
great.
Okay.
Yeah, if you all, especially if you do social media, you know, just spread some love. Just say, hey, this guy is not bad. You got to hear what he has to say.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, excellent presenter. Lots of food for thought. And now I'm really hungry, says Eliza. I know.
Mission accomplished.
Yep, definitely. All right. Well, thank you so much again, Adrian. And hopefully we can meet you in person at some point and, you know, do a taste testing with follow you around on a food tour. That would be great. That's a business opportunity right there when we reopen.
Yeah, I think you might
tours.
be onto something.
So
Cool. Well, thanks again for the invitation. Good to be with you all.
yeah.
Thank
All
you.
right. Take care.
All right, peace.